Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our program today. My name is Zina Manji. I am a Global Fellow at HITLAB. I'm also Head of Regulatory Affairs at Ellume. And today I am actually substituting for Nina Joshi, who you may be quite familiar with seeing with Women's Health Tech. So today I'm really happy to be able to host the program today. So just as reminders, the next symposia is in August. It's the value-based care in real-world patient engagement. You can go to the QR code for more information. And that's on August 31st. We have in November, the Fall Innovators Summit in 2023 of November this year. You may know that we just completed the previous Innovators Summit, and being in person really made a big difference. So please do look at the QR code for more information. And if you're interested in sponsoring any of the events listed here, including Women's Health Tech Wednesday, such as the program today, you can get more information on the QR code. So I'm really happy to introduce our guest today, Rachel Tornheim. She's got a really interesting role in career background, and it's great to have you join us today, Rachel. So if I could turn it over to you by way of introduction and a few words about yourself and your role.
Certainly. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Rachel Tornheim. I live in New York City, in Manhattan, originally from the Boston area, but I've been a New Yorker for almost 20 years now. And I've been working in the healthcare industry here in New York since I graduated from business school in 2010. So I've worked at a lot of different organizations, currently at Mount Sinai, helping to lead a team that builds patient engagement software.
You know, it's such a timely topic today with patient engagement software, consumer access, that digital front door aspect. So really interesting career path you've had. So would you like to give us some description about your career path and how you got to the role that you have today, which sounds like a unique one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually studied computer science in undergrad. I've always been very detail oriented and had an analytical mind, so that seemed like a good fit. But when I went to do internships between the different years of college, I found that I didn't feel like I could compete primarily with the men in the programs who had been taking apart computers since they were very young. I took my first computer science course sophomore year of college. And so I felt like if this was really my passion and my calling, of course, I could have been self-taught. I could have gone to various programs, but I didn't feel prepared by my coursework. And I didn't feel that really strong drive to go and pursue that technical path. So I went back to Wellesley. I went to the Career Center and I asked, what other options are there for me? And they said, well, the consulting firms are coming first, and then the publishing firms and the law firms and a host of other things. So I said, okay, I'll try all those out. Why not? Interviewed for some consulting jobs and ended up being offered a position in New York City at Katzenbach Partners, which I accepted. So I stayed there for 4 years and developed really all of the foundational skills that have been critical to every job I've had since then, right? So project management and meeting facilitation, relationship development, analysis, and Excel. From there, I went to grad school. I went to Kellogg for an MBA, and I did a dual degree where I got a master's in engineering management as well. And while I was at Kellogg, I did some soul searching around what did I want to do next. I didn't have a clear vision of that when I started grad school. So I looked back at my time in consulting and I asked myself, what are the things that you liked and that you want to have in your next job? And what are the things that you'd rather leave behind in that consulting phase? So I realized that I was most motivated by the internal process improvement projects I did for our firm, more so than the client work, right? Which was the bulk of my job. So I realized that I want to do work where I can see the impact of what I'm doing versus a consulting role. I didn't love feeling in consulting kind of like a corporate sellout, right? Like we were just sort of doing work for the highest bidder, helping rich companies get richer. I wanted to do something with more of a mission. And I didn't love the travel, being on those 6 a.m. flights to Texas, to Chicago. I didn't want to do that anymore. So taking all of those things together, I narrowed my job search down to 3 sectors: healthcare, technology, and education. and I ended up getting an internship at a hospital in the Chicago area. So that was my first entree into healthcare. Really enjoyed the internship, found that I was able to add value. So then I turned my career search for post-grad school specifically to hospital systems in New York City. I ended up getting a job in the revenue cycle department of New York Presbyterian Hospital. I knew revenue cycle specifically was not going to be my passion, but I just wanted to get my foot in the door in the healthcare industry and establish that baseline. So I was there for a few years, then went to Remedy Partners, which is a health tech startup in the value-based care space, was later acquired by Signify. I had 2 roles there. I was director of project management, overseeing project management for a large customer, and then actually created a role for myself on the clinical team, reporting directly to the chief medical officer. And then after 3 years at Remedy, I went to Village Care, which is a small insurance company in New York City serving Medicaid and Medicare members. Originally hired as director of PMO, but was asked to take on leadership of the quality and data and analytics departments as well. I was there for about 1.5 years, then went to MD Calc, which is a small health tech startup that puts medical calculators used by doctors on a website and other tools that they can use. I was there for about 1 year, and now I've been at Mount Sinai for a little over 2 years at this point on this kind of internal startup within the health system that builds patient engagement software.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing, Rachel. And a couple of things I'm hearing from that, even if I compare it with my own journey in healthcare, is sounds like initially you were not quite sure how you wanted to apply your skills, and first of all, what skills to grow. So it sounds like your consulting role really gave you kind of a big breadth of knowledge, and I think you even said foundational experiences. So it sounds like that was a pretty, well, I should say foundational role, because you springboarded from that and those skills that you built into all of these other roles. And it sounds like with all the other roles, you didn't just pigeonhole yourself into one aspect of healthcare. You got into the insurance, you got into clinical, which was interesting. And then you're also into kind of the startup phase and actually supplying, even more and then more established phase as well. So I find that really quite interesting, and how you also took steps with intention, it sounds like, as well, because you were trying to see, okay, what do you really like? So I think that's really was smart of you to do, is that you stopped and said, what do you actually like doing? And having that self-awareness of client base versus actually seeing the impact certainly makes a huge amount of difference. And I think sounds like that was a pivotal moment for you and where you're going now. So based on that, simplifying it down to the healthcare aspect, what actually gave you the focus that healthcare was where you wanted to be? Sounds like it was wanting to see a difference.
Sure. Yeah, it was partly wanting to do something that's mission oriented, right? Wanting to feel like my job is hopefully making the world a little bit better for some people. Healthcare is also so inefficient. And we all know this because we're all patients, right? So we all have that intuitive understanding. I'm someone who goes through life seeing things that are inefficient and wanting to fix them, and like sometimes stepping in to fix them when it's not really my job. One small story I'll tell: in business school, they would have talks during lunch and they would have pizza laid out on a table, and you'd get in line to get your pizza, and then you'd go into the talk. And that was always a bottleneck. There was always a long line of people waiting to get their pizza. And so I would often go to the front of the line, pull the tables away from the wall so that people could go down both sides and, double the throughput. So healthcare, obviously super inefficient in this country. So that drew me to it. It's also local. So I think from like a job security perspective, some aspects of healthcare can be outsourced, right? Obviously there's medical tourism, but there will always be physical brick and mortar hospitals and providers of healthcare. Anywhere you want to live, like there's going to be healthcare providers. So those are some of the key aspects. And then it's also, there's so much diversity within healthcare, right? So I don't feel like there's a risk, even if I work in healthcare for the next 3 decades, I'm not going to get bored because there's so many different aspects, so many different players in the industry, and also just so many innovations and new technologies. It's an exciting field that's moving forward and constantly changing.
Yeah, and I think a key point that you made is even with the new technologies and application of new ways of doing things, you can always do things in a much more optimized and efficient way to make sure it's actually being used, because it's great to have all these tools, but if you're not actually being able to use them as was intended, you're really not making that difference that was behind that mission of creating those products. Yeah, this is an amazing amount of insight that you have. And when you're looking at, going into these different roles and going into a leadership position that you have now, what are some of the things that you considered in kind of going into this leadership role based on the diversity of experience that you had, and how have you had to adapt how you work?
I think, are you getting at sort of different types of organizations, like looking at kind of larger hospital systems versus
Right, and
smaller?
how that gave you kind of the feedback to think about going into your current role.
Certainly, yeah. So I was not looking to get back into hospital administration. This role happened very serendipitously. I was actually on a video networking call through a platform called Lunch Club that sets you up on one-on-one calls. And I was talking to a guy who was a medical student at the time at Mount Sinai's Icahn School of Medicine, and he was doing a fellowship with the consumer digital team at Mount Sinai. And so as I was describing my background to him, he said, "Oh, we have an opening for a head of product operations on our team. You sound like a great fit. Like, let me connect you to my boss." And that turned into the job. So I took this role because it was a startup within a larger health system. So we still had that kind of unique culture that was agile, that was looking to constantly improve. And it was a small team. It was like 20 or 25 people when I joined. So yeah, that was one factor that I looked at. I do tend to feel like I'm a better cultural fit in smaller teams that are looking to move fast and be agile. But there's definitely been some advantages of working at a large institution too. One of the biggest ones as a hiring manager, I've really appreciated the fact that large hospital systems often have departments of international personnel where there are
Yeah.
people who have expertise in how to apply for different types of visas. And so that empowers me to be able to hire people who need sponsorship. And I love hiring people who need sponsorship, right? Like they're eager, they tend to stay around for a longer time, right? They're not gonna get that visa and then leave for another job in 6 months. So that's been really great. Hospital systems tend to have better work-life balance than startups sometimes. They can be a little bit more stable. So those are some of the upsides. And then, on the flip side, joining a younger organization means you're going to have more of an opportunity to leave your mark, right? Just because some of the foundational processes aren't set yet. It might be easier to move to different roles, although larger organizations are going to have more roles because it's more people. So, I think it's important to look at the specifics of the role you're being offered. And I tried to, I'm glad that I kept an open mind and I didn't say like, oh no, that's a job at a hospital system. I would never consider that. I looked at kind of the specifics of this team and decided that it was a good fit for me.
I think there's a lot of learnings there that people can take from what you just described. Certainly, looking at the role, but also looking at the role in the environment in which the role exists, right? That makes a huge amount of difference. And you were very thoughtful about that, sounds like, in kind of considering this type of role. And when you're looking at, I mean, you mentioned earlier, and maybe it was in your earlier roles, is very male dominated, and you were one of few, or if any, females in your in the environment you were in. So how did that impact what you decided to do in terms of your career adaptation?
Sure. Yeah, when I joined the leadership team at Consumer Digital, my boss was a man, and then my three peers, the other heads of departments, were all men. So I was the only woman on the leadership team. I was very lucky. This team in particular is just, it's all really wonderful people. And I never felt any sort of negativity around gender. It wasn't an issue at all. However, I do think critically about what tasks I take on, and I do try to be strategic and careful about if I'm going to take on a task that might be traditionally female coded, making sure I'm doing so in a way that is seen more as a leader and less as a secretary. So as an example, when I joined, we had weekly leadership team meetings, and it was the five of us together. There was not a lot of structure. So there was no agenda, no one was taking notes, no one was tracking next steps. And I'm big on accountability and project management. So I wanted to offer to take notes. And then I made sure, in addition to taking notes, I would submit a proposed agenda to the group in advance. And so by doing that, that then naturally set me up to be the one to facilitate the meetings. So I was able to couple a task that might be seen as more secretarial with these leadership behaviors. And I believe that that type of role and taking on that type of responsibility proactively is a lot of what set me up to then be tapped to be promoted into my boss's role when he left.
That's fantastic. So yeah, it sounds like that was a really good move on your part, and also very natural in the way that you executed it, because it's really about that, I guess, positional power, the authority aspect, and how you show up. So you enabled the team to say, look, look at these agenda topics ahead of time. This is the expectation as being the agenda setter of what you are expecting to occur during the meeting and where the outcome needs to be. So you're naturally kind of setting yourself up as, you have these expectations of who's showing up and what actually occurs at the meeting, and naturally kind of, saying, okay, you're in that leadership position, as opposed to kind of maybe aggressively or dictatorially say, hey, I'm the leader and you all must follow. So I think that very tactfully done. So great job on that. So it sounds like that really made a difference for you. And have you had to adapt yourself in any other ways in how you were working?
I mean, other behaviors I've taken on as I've taken on leadership positions where I am over a larger scope, I've had to let go of my desire to understand the details of everything, right?
Yeah.
And something that I frequently try to remind myself is like, no CEO can possibly have expertise in all of the functions under them, right? So I've now been in 2 roles where I've overseen people whose jobs I don't understand, whose jobs I couldn't do, right? And so rather than try to chase all of those details and try to get all of that content expertise, I have to focus on empowering the people on my team, right? Making sure that they're motivated, making sure to be giving positive feedback, making sure to be asking about barriers and look into how I can remove those, making sure to provide information on the bigger picture, right? So people understand the impact of their work, and doing what I can to try to make the team that I'm helping to lead a place that people want to work, right? Because the cost of turnover is so high. And you'd be surprised how much a leader taking the time to, ask about someone's day, take someone out for a coffee, right? These small gestures, I think, can really make an impact on people's decision to stay.
Yeah, that's absolutely huge. And I think it reminds me of a quote from Barbara Corcoran, who says her job as CEO is to make you as her employee to do your job better. And absolutely, I think, as you say, we can't know everything. So then part of leadership is hiring people who don't have the experience that you have, and making sure you're getting the input that you need to meet the deliverables that are required. So in terms of then leadership or development within your team, have you had opportunity to engage more women in and diversity into your role, into your team?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've hired both men and women. My philosophy of hiring, so it bothers me that so many jobs are gotten through people's networks and rather through, having something posted and being open to everyone. And so it makes me a little bit uncomfortable to pursue jobs that way, but I know if I don't play that game, like, you can't move ahead. So you sort of have to play by those rules. When I am hiring, I make a point of always posting jobs in good faith. right? And not just, oh, I decided who's going to go in this role, but trying to open it up. And being at a large institution like Mount Sinai, one of the benefits of that is that we have a robust HR and recruiting department, right? So like I'll have an assigned recruiter and I can give them screening questions and they'll screen the candidates and they'll send the information to me. And so that's gotten me access to candidates who, I wouldn't have met on my own. Our team is, I think it's like 51, 52% women. We've got 29 total people. It's 15 women and 14 men. So happy to see that. We were hoping to, one area that's been really difficult to get gender parity in has been senior engineers. So our engineering leaders tend to be more men, and that's something that when we were hiring, we were trying to prioritize, but it was pretty tough.
Yeah, I think one thing to be really cognizant of is that you also want the best person for the role. Mm-hmm. And balancing that with diversity needs and team structure is also equally important. So you have to kind of balance that all together.
Yeah, and I'd say it's also not just like what are the genders of the people on the team and trying to have that be equal, but it's also making sure you're hiring people who are going to create an environment that is welcoming to everyone. So we make sure in interviews, any candidate who's interviewing, we want to make sure there are women who are interviewing them, right? If someone comes in, whether it's a man or a woman, if they're interviewed by an all-male panel, like that doesn't send a good signal. And we watch out for subtle language, and if someone is using language that's not going to be welcoming to women, then that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a challenge that we all have to balance as we're looking to get the right people into roles and really have that culture of competence that came up in health equity, and also in the health equity symposia just recently that we had with HITLAB, and you were a presenter there as well. Reminds me a lot of many of those discussions there. And getting health equity really depends on the people, not just the people that you're serving and the products that you're creating, but also part of that delivery team in the culture in which you're engaging with patients. So as you were going through your career and coming into more leadership roles, a common quote is, fake it till you make it kind of thing. And I think people have had different experiences with that. What's your view on kind of that concept?
Sure. I think it depends on what you want to fake. So portraying yourself as confident when maybe you feel a little bit nervous, absolutely do that, right? Like work on public speaking, try to get out some of those filler words, speak confidently. That I wholeheartely endorse. Pretending to know content or concepts that you don't, right? Or like smiling and nodding if someone is referencing something that you're not familiar with, that I wouldn't suggest. On the contrary, I think especially for leaders, I think it's good to model admitting when we don't know something, right? That's much more healthy for an organization than people pretending and nodding along with things that they don't understand. And I think there's strength in being able to say, oh, I'm not familiar with that concept. Could you back up and explain that to me? Or I'm sorry, what does that acronym stand for? So that's something I would encourage. I also think if we're asked to, speak or provide input on something that we're not an expert in, that's a great opportunity to pull in someone else, right? And maybe collaborate or point someone to a different expert. So you referenced the recent HITLAB symposium. I was asked to speak, and the topic was health equity. I am not an expert on health equity. So I pulled in my colleague, Gary, who has a lot more experience on that. And together we collaborated and put together a presentation that reflected both of our perspectives as well as a bunch of research.
Yeah, that was a really great session. So Rachel, well done on that with Gary. I think perfect example of how you reach out for collaboration, because as you say, as leaders, we can't know everything. And I think an important aspect you just brought forward is it's important to show vulnerability as well. And that concept of curiosity. So asking questions doesn't mean you necessarily, well, I don't know anything. It's also that aspect of curiosity. Tell me more. I want to learn more, right? And kind of figuring out then how you adapt that and what more needs to be done and what your team can grow. And as you said about agile team, well, that's all about agility as well, as taking new learnings and seeing how you can adapt it in different ways.
Absolutely.
So what would you say as kind of as we wrap up this session, which is going extremely fast? What are words of advice you would have for younger women or even your younger self?
Yeah, err on the side of saying yes. When you're offered an opportunity, the first voice in your head will often be all the reasons that you're not qualified or that you can't. And I definitely had that voice when I was asked to speak on health equity. Try to figure out a way to say yes that kind of hedges any risks, right? So for me, that was inviting Gary to present with me, right? Or similarly, when I was asked to take on this leadership role over this team, or when I was asked to take on ownership of the quality and data and analytics departments that I didn't have expertise in, figuring out what I could ask for that would make me feel comfortable saying yes, right? Which might have been, let's do it on a trial basis, or I'd like to meet with my boss on a weekly basis to get insight. Try to get to that yes, unless it's you don't have the bandwidth or there are ethical problems. But if you're leaning toward no is because you don't think you're qualified or you don't think you can, try to find a way to get to the yes. So that's one. And then two, try to maintain your network. So every time I leave a job, I try to think intentionally about what are the relationships of that job that I want to keep, right? And then, whether that's making myself a reminder in a month, or asking that person to coffee or dinner or something like that. I continue to have relationships with people who I worked with 10, 20 years ago. And that's been really fruitful.
Amazing amount of advice, Rachel, and good reminders for me as well. And what you say really resonates. So Rachel, it was just absolutely fantastic to join you today and discuss your career path with you. I think amazing amount of diverse advice, and I think it would be really meaningful for our audience. So really appreciate you sharing today.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.